Sarah's hand flew to Ada's mouth. The very second the study door began to creak open. "Don't talk," she whispered, breath tight, eyes wide with deadly warning. On the other side of the door, a man's voice drifted to the crack, calm, cold, discussing murder as if he were ordering breakfast. It was Chinedu Okonkwo, Michael Adelique's trusted business partner, talking on the phone with someone about the final solution to our Michael problem. But let me take you back, my dear listeners, to how our young Ada Okafor found herself in this life or death moment. Just hours earlier, Ada had been cleaning the Grand Adelique mansion in Victoria Island, Lagos, a palace of marble and gold where billionaires made decisions that shaped nations. She was invisible, as house helps are expected to be, a girl from a small village in Enugu State, sending every naira home to her sick mother, grateful for work that kept her family alive. But invisibility, as our ancestors knew, can be both a curse and a blessing. That night, carrying fresh towels through corridors that echoed with whispered secrets, Ada stumbled upon a conversation that would either make her a hero or get her killed. She had pressed herself against the wall outside the study, heart pounding like village drums during thunder season, when she heard Sarah Adelique's voice, sweet as honey, deadly as cobra venom. One injection, Chinedu, it will look natural. Heart failure. No one questions when a man Michael's age collapses from stress. The towels nearly fell from Ada's trembling hands. Mrs. Sarah, who smiled at her every morning, who complimented her cooking, who seemed like the perfect billionaire's wife, was planning her husband's murder. That's when the door began to open, and Sarah's hand clamped over Ada's mouth like a trap. My friends, what she heard next could end a billionaire's life, and seal her own fate forever. Like a shadow guided by destiny, Ada crept toward the study where the voices originated. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, she saw a scene that would haunt her dreams forever. There stood Chinedu Okonkwo, Mr. Michael's trusted business partner and childhood friend from their days at the University of Lagos. But this was not the smiling man who brought gifts from his trips to New York and Houston. This was a stranger, holding something that glinted in the lamplight, a syringe. The needle caught the light like a serpent's fang, filled with a clear liquid that promised death. Sarah paced behind him, her designer nightgown flowing like the robes of a vengeful spirit. "Michael trusts you completely," she whispered. "Tomorrow night at the charity gala, when he's giving his speech about helping orphans across Africa, how ironic. My listeners, can you imagine?" This woman spoke of her husband's death as casually as discussing the weather. But Chinedu seemed nervous, his hand shaking. "Sarah, I don't know if I can." "You can and you will," she hissed. "Unless you want your little embezzlement scheme exposed to the entire business community in Lagos, Abuja, and beyond. 20 million naira, Chinedu. That's a lot of explaining to do." Ada watched through crack, her breath coming in short gasps. She saw Chinedu's face crumble, saw him nod reluctantly, saw him slip the syringe into his jacket pocket. But then disaster. The floorboard beneath Ada's feet creaked like a cry of warning from the ancestors themselves. Both heads in the study turned toward the door. Time froze. Sarah's eyes, cold as the Atlantic wind, met Ada's through the crack. The syringe gleamed under the light, death waiting in a small glass tube. What force drives people to such darkness? What desperation makes a friend become an executioner? Sarah moved like a lioness stalking prey. Each step across the marble floor echoed like thunder in Ada's ears. The young woman wanted to run, but her feet felt rooted to the ground like an ancient baobab tree. The study door swung open completely. Sarah stood there, tall and elegant, her face a mask of deadly calm. Behind her, Chinedu looked like a man who had already seen his own grave. "Ada," Sarah's voice was honey mixed with poison. "What are you doing awake at this hour?" I was taking towels to..." Ada's voice trembled like a leaf in harmattan wind. Sarah stepped closer, so close that Ada could smell her expensive perfume. French, probably costing more than Ada's family earned in a year. She leaned down until her lips were next to Ada's ear, and then she whispered words that would echo in nightmares. "Don't talk or you die." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a sacrificial fire. Sarah's breath was warm against Ada's skin, but her words were ice-cold death. You saw nothing. You heard nothing. Tomorrow, you will serve at the gala as planned. You will smile. You will be silent. Because if you speak one word, just one word, about what you think you witnessed tonight. She paused, her fingers trailing along Ada's arm like spider legs. Your mother in Enugu needs her medicine, doesn't she? Your little brother wants to go to university. Your sister's wedding is next month. It would be unfortunate if something happened to any of them. The tension froze the air like a Lagos traffic jam. Fear wrapped around Ada's throat like a python's embrace. But sometimes, my dear listeners, it's in our darkest moments that we discover our true strength. As our ancestors used to say, when the spider weaves its web, it doesn't know that the wind is coming. The next evening brought the annual Adelic Foundation Charity Gala, an event that drew the wealthy from Lagos to London, from Accra to Atlanta. The mansion transformed into a palace of lights. Guests arrived in convoys of luxury cars, Mercedes, Bentleys, Lamborghinis with more than entire villages. Women dripped in diamonds, men in custom suits that cost more than teachers' yearly salaries. But Ada saw none of the glamour. She moved the crowd like a ghost, carrying trays of champagne while death whispered in her ear. Every time she looked at Sarah, radiant in a gold dress that cost more than Ada's life was worth, she remembered those 4 words, "Don't talk or you die." The guest list read like a who's who of African and international business. There was Kwame Asani from Ghana, Maria Santos from Brazil, James Rodriguez from Chicago, Michael's Harvard Business School roommate, who now ran hotels across 3 continents. As Ada served drinks, she noticed James watching everything with the sharp eyes of a man who had built an empire by reading people. When she offered him champagne, he smiled and said in accented Igbo, "Ada, right? Mr. Michael speaks highly of you." She nearly dropped the tray. How did this American know her name? How did he know Igbo? But there was no time to wonder. The program was beginning. Michael took the stage, handsome in his custom agbada, speaking passionately about funding schools across Africa. The crowd applauded as he raised his champagne glass for a toast to the children who will change our continent's future. But as the glass touched his lips, Ada noticed something that made her blood freeze. But the glass Michael raised was not the one he thought. My dear listeners, sometimes fate wears a disguise of coincidence. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. The applause died like a fire doused with water. Michael's face went pale, then gray, then the color of storm clouds. His hand flew to his throat. His eyes widened in shock and terror. The champagne glass fell from his fingers, shattering into 1,000 pieces on the marble floor. He stumbled backward, clutching the podium for support, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, like a mighty Irako tree felled by lightning, he collapsed. The screams came first from the women, sharp, piercing cries that could wake the dead. Then chaos erupted like a Lagos market on fire. Guests rushed forward. Phones appeared. Someone shouted for a doctor. But Ada's eyes were fixed on 2 people. Sarah, who ran to her husband with tears streaming down her face, crying, "Michael, my love, someone help him." But Ada noticed that her hands were steady, her tears perfectly timed. This was a performance worthy of Nollywood. And Chinedu, who stood frozen near the back of the crowd, his face the color of chalk. As people rushed toward the fallen billionaire, Chinedu moved against the tide, slipping quietly toward the kitchen entrance. Ada's training as a house help had taught her to notice everything while appearing to notice nothing. She followed him. The kitchen was chaos. Caterers running, ice being fetched, someone calling for ambulances. But Chinedu wasn't helping. He moved with purpose toward the service exit, his hand in his jacket pocket. Ada shadowed him like her life depended on it, which, she realized, it probably did. Outside, in the garden where the Lagos night was thick with humidity and fear, Chinedu pulled out the syringe. It was empty now, its deadly contents already coursing through Michael's veins. He raised it to throw it into the lagoon, but then he paused, listening. Sirens, ambulances were coming. But when she chased him into that garden, what she found was worse than poison. Sometimes, my dear listeners, The truth has more thorns than a rose bush. Sometimes saving one life means risking everything you hold dear. Looking for this? Ada spun around so fast, she nearly fell into the ornamental pond. There, standing in the garden entrance like an avenging spirit, was Michael Adelik himself. Alive, alert, very much not dying. In his hand was another syringe, identical to the one Chinedu was holding. Chinedu, my old friend. Michael's voice was calm, but Ada could hear the pain underneath. Not physical pain, but the deep ache of betrayal. Did you really think I wouldn't notice 20 million naira disappearing from our joint accounts? Chinedu's face went through more changes than Lagos traffic lights. Shock, fear, confusion, then desperate anger. How? The injection. I saw you drink. You saw me raise a glass, Michael said, stepping closer. But James here has been watching both you and my dear wife for weeks. From behind a large palm tree stepped James Rodriguez, no longer the casual party guest, but moving with the precision of someone accustomed to handling dangerous situations. 5 years of investigating corporate fraud in Chicago teaches you to read people, James said in perfect English, then switched to fluent Igbo. Your wife hired private investigators to follow you both. She suspected something but needed proof. Ada's mind reeled like a motorcycle on bad Lagos roads. Michael knew James was investigating. The whole evening was a trap, Michael confirmed, as if reading her thoughts. When James told me what his investigators discovered, we had to be sure. We had to catch you both in the act. He held up the syringe. Harmless saline solution, by the way, though I did have to practice my collapse. How did it look? First big twist, my dear listeners. Michael already knew, but when you corner a dangerous animal, it doesn't surrender quietly. Sometimes it fights back with everything it has left. You think you're so clever, Chinedu snarled, his voice no longer that a friend and business partner Michael had known for 20 years. This was a stranger, backed into a corner with nothing left to lose. He threw the empty syringe at Michael's feet, where it shattered like their friendship. But you forgot one thing, old friend. I came prepared for every possibility. From the same jacket pocket that held the syringe, Chinedu pulled out something that made Ada's heart stop beating. A gun. Small, black, deadly as a mamba's bite. Even if the poison didn't work, even if you suspected something, I was ready, he said, his hand steady now, his voice cold with murderous resolve. I've already transferred the money to accounts in Dubai, London, New York. Sarah and I will be on a plane to Switzerland within hours. Sarah? Michael's voice cracked. Even though he'd known about their affair, hearing it confirmed was like being stabbed in the heart. Your wife never loved you, Chinedu laughed, a sound like breaking glass. She married you for your money, stayed with you for your money, and now she's leaving you for your money. And me. James was calculating distances, but the gun was pointed directly at Michael's chest. One wrong move, and that's when Ada made a decision that would echo through the rest of her life. Her grandmother's words came back to her like ancestral wisdom. Child, there comes a moment in every life when you must choose between being safe and being right. Choose carefully, for that choice will define who you are forever. Without thinking, without planning, without considering the consequences, Ada leaped forward. Time slowed like honey from a calabash. She saw Chinedu's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Michael's eyes widen in shock, saw James diving to tackle the gunman. The gun fired. Glass exploded somewhere behind them. A garden lantern, shattered by the bullet that should have ended Michael's life. But Ada was on Chinedu now, her small frame somehow finding the strength of her ancestors, fighting with the desperation of a woman who had already lost everything and therefore had nothing left to fear. What happened next was chaos worthy of an action film, but this was real life, with real bullets and real blood. Ada and Chinedu crashed into the ornamental pond with a splash that sent koi fish scattering like golden bullets. The gun flew from his hand, landing with a splash among the lily pads. James dove after it while Michael rushed to help Ada. But Chinedu was stronger, desperate, and fighting for his freedom. His hands found Ada's throat, squeezing like a vice. She gasped, water filling her lungs, darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. Should have stayed quiet, little mouse, he hissed. Should have remembered what happens to house helps who forget their place. That was his mistake. Those words, about knowing her place, about being just a house help, ignited something in Ada that had been building for months. Years. A lifetime of being told she was nothing, worth nothing, expected to be nothing. With strength born of righteous anger, she broke free from his grip and drove her elbow into his solar plexus with force that surprised them both. Chinita doubled over, gasping. That's when James reached them, the gun safely in his possession, and Michael's security team finally arrived, alerted by the gunshot. Within minutes, the garden was full of people. Security guards tackled a still-struggling Chinita. Guests poured out from the gala, drawn by the commotion. Police sirens wailed in the distance. But Michael saw only Ada, drenched and shaking the pond, her maid's uniform torn but her eyes blazing with triumph and defiance. He waded in and helped her to her feet, his expensive suit forgotten. Ada, his voice was thick with emotion. You saved my life. You risked everything, your job, your safety, your family's future, to save me. She looked up at him, water dripping from her hair, and said the words that would change everything. My grandmother taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, sir. Courage is doing what's right even when you're terrified. Michael smiled then, the first real smile Ada had seen from him. From today, you are not my employee. You are family. Would you forgive Sarah, or never again? Sometimes betrayal cuts so deep it can never heal. But sometimes, my dear listeners, the greatest victories come from the most unlikely heroes. When the police led Chinita away in handcuffs, he was sobbing like a child, begging for mercy, for forgiveness, for one more chance. His bravado had crumbled like a house built on sand. But Sarah was different. She walked out of the mansion in her golden dress, her makeup still perfect, her head held high like a queen going to her coronation instead of her arrest. When the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she smiled. Not the fake smile Ada had seen her use on guests and servants. Not the practiced smile of a billionaire's wife. This was something else entirely. The smile of a woman who knew something no one else did. Mrs. Adelic, the police inspector said, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and... I know what I'm charged with, Sarah interrupted, her voice calm as still water. But tell me, Inspector, have you found all the money? Michael stepped forward, confusion clear on his face. What do you mean, all the money? Sarah's smile widened. Oh, my dear husband, you think this was just about 20 million naira? You think Chinita and I were satisfied with such a small amount? James's face went pale. As a fraud investigator, he recognized that look. Michael, we need to check the accounts. All of them. Now. Too late. Sarah laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. While you were playing detective games tonight, automated transfers were moving money from every single one of your accounts. Swiss banks don't ask questions when transfers are made with proper authorization codes. She looked directly at Ada then, her eyes glittering with malice. You saved his life, little house girl, but you couldn't save his fortune. By morning, Michael Adelic will be just another poor man in Lagos, and I'll be very rich in Geneva. Why would a woman smile when her empire is gone? Because, my dear listeners, sometimes the real plan is hidden deeper than anyone imagines. Sometimes the spider has more than one web. 3 days later, Ada sat in her new room in the Adelic mansion. Not a servant's quarters this time, but proper guest room with its own bathroom and a view of the lagoon. Michael had insisted, despite his financial troubles. The newspapers called it the Adelic scandal. CNN covered it. BBC interviewed financial experts about billion-naira fraud schemes. Sarah's plan had indeed worked, almost perfectly, but as Ada lay awake, staring at the Lagos skyline, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Sarah's smile haunted her dreams. That confidence, that certainty even in handcuffs. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Michael entered, looking older than his 45 years, carrying a cup of tea and wearing the expression of a man who had lost almost everything but somehow found peace. Can't sleep either? He asked, setting the tea on her nightstand. Sir, Michael, she corrected herself, still adjusting to his insistence that she call him by name. I keep thinking about what your wife said, about having a deeper plan. Michael sighed, settling into the chair by her window. James is still investigating. The Swiss banks are cooperating, but these things take time. She may have stolen my money, Ada, but she didn't steal what matters most. What's that, sir? My life, my integrity, my ability to start over. He smiled at her, and she gave me something unexpected. A reminder that courage still exists in this world, even in the most unlikely people. Ada felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm not brave, sir. I was terrified. That's what made it brave. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the lights of Lagos shimmer on the water. Then Michael spoke again. There's something else. The Foundation's board met today. They want you to take over Sarah's position, Managing Director of Community Outreach. They were impressed by what you did, but more than that, they trust you. Ada nearly spilled her tea. Sir, I'm just a village girl from Enugu. I barely finished secondary school. And I'm just a boy from Mushin who got lucky with technology. We'll figure out together. But as they talked of new beginnings and second chances, neither of them noticed a black sedan parked across from the mansion gates. Neither saw the figure inside, watching their window with patience that spoke of detailed planning. Because sometimes, my dear listeners, the echo of the drum carries more than music. Sometimes it carries warnings of storms still coming. The next morning, the police made a discovery that would change everything once again. In Sarah's personal safe, behind family photos and jewelry, they found a single letter addressed to Ada Okafor. Inside, in Sarah's elegant handwriting, were words that would haunt Ada forever. By the time you read this, little house girl, you'll think you've won. You'll think saving Michael makes you a hero. But heroes in fairy tales live happily ever after. This isn't a fairy tale. I have friends you've never imagined, resources you can't comprehend, and patience you can't match. Enjoy your victory. It won't last long. Some games have more moves than you know how to count. And so our tale ends where all the best folk tales do, with wisdom earned through fire, with courage discovered in darkness, with the understanding that some victories are just the beginning of longer wars. My grandmother used to say, the river that flows quietly often runs the deepest. Ada Okafor learned that night that her own river ran deeper than she had ever imagined. But what was written in that letter? What friends does Sarah have that we haven't met? What moves in this deadly game are still to come? If you want to know how this story truly ends, because, my dear listeners, this is only the beginning, then hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment telling me, would you have stayed quiet to protect your family, or would you have found the courage to speak? Share this story with someone who needs to remember that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, from all walks of life. The drums of our ancestors still echo with wisdom. When the spider thinks it has woven a perfect web, the wind reminds it that some forces cannot be controlled. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's the smallest voice that creates the strongest wind. Until next time, remember, in a world full of Sarahs and Chinitas, dare to be an Ada